This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MTG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MTG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal cast. We've got kind of a trending issue in the MTG Finance world today is what we're going to be covering. Rudy posted a video about the reserve list is crashing, the sky is falling, oh no, we're all dying. And there were a couple videos about that as well, which prompted me to tweet out from our Twitter, which you should follow, about what my thoughts are, basically, for what that means for the MTG Finance world. So let's cover the basics then. Let's get it taken away.
Yep. So leading economic indicators for the past couple of months have pointed to the fact that we are going to be moving into our expected decade-ly recession within the U.S., either in 2019 or early 2020. And we're also moving into the winter doldrums, coming out of a heavy wall-up fatigue season. So what we're seeing is a lot of high-end reserve list cards just stagnating in price and eventually clogging inventory, lowering buy prices on these cards. Retail stays the same, buy price goes down because inventory is not moving. At the same time, what you're seeing, though, is that highly liquid cards continue to move both the retail and buy list side. So the high-profile portion of the game that people like Rudy like to claim is their market indicator, their bread and butter, might be stagnating here, but it's not permanent stagnation, and it's not going to be any kind of regressive pricing. We're not going to see the price of a Lotus drop. We're not going to see dual lands drop. We will see them stagnate, and then eventually when we come out the other side in 2020, maybe around April, in tax season, quote-unquote, we'll see those prices begin to pick up, and you'll watch the reserve list generally continue on with its between like 5 and 7% year-over-year growth.
Yeah. And I do want to say, we'll still see the year-end bump that you typically see in that stuff, courtesy of Vegas and Eternal Weekend. Mm-hmm. It's just, I don't think it's going to be as big, and I don't think that it really makes sense for it to be as big. Like, for example, last week, Card Kingdom's buy list on Flooded Strand was $12, and this week it's $15.50. Well, they tanked their buy list for reserve list stuff in that time. Eureka dropped $100.
Yeah.
Mox Diamond only dropped 30, but that's got absurd legacy playability. It's that type of stuff that you're going to see drop, but it makes more sense for them because it becomes much more about cash flow at this point. Mm-hmm. So they're much more concerned with let's tank our buy price on high end stuff because we'll still get it.
Yes.
Vendors will still acquire it, and they don't have to pay as much because it's the winter sell-off season. So, someone's going to propose on Christmas Day in front of their family, and they're going to sell their Twister to buy a ring. How romantic. But that's going to happen regardless of what the buy price is. The thing is, when you start to get these, as you phrased it, the winter doldrums, and people are just liquidating mass amounts of their collection for holiday spending or to get a house or a ring or whatever, they'll have a bunch of flooded strands, and that stuff remains incredibly liquid throughout an economic downturn because people are still playing.
Yes.
The casual players, the players that go to F&M, that play in the weeklies, that don't grind out 10 hours a week on, 20 hours a week on Moto, that aren't grinding for top 100 Mythic on Arena, they're still going to go out and they're still going to need those cards. Mm-hmm. So you want to acquire as many of them as possible because that churn keeps going.
Yes.
And the more you keep that going during an economic downturn, the more opportunity you have when it's over and we're back in a boom situation.
Yeah, to just come back and it's still business as usual. And this is a really good example of what we talk about every now and again, which is that it, not as a collector, but as somebody who's just trying to grind your way through the game, keeping inventory for too long is actually impactful in a negative direction, where it's just sitting there taking up inventory space, and it's money you could have churned several times over. And there's no business that is in the business of doing exactly that, buying a product and holding it just because. They want to churn that stock because that money will churn several times and it will grow multiples each time you churn it. Yeah. So holding off on those large products, which, as you said, people will still sell no matter what, in favor of buying a higher quantity of smaller churning products is an overall better business model when you're moving into the time of year where people are going to be spending less on a hobby than they will be on the rest of their lives.
Yep.
In that time period. And it's not to say that collectors stop collecting. Those people will still do their thing. It's those guys that just kind of squirrel away money all year long by doing their own little bits of buying and selling and eventually trying to move up into duels or power those people are going to kind of disappear at that point in time. But as you stated, the people who just go and play F&Ms are still going to be buying these cards because they're still affordable. These cards being Flooded Strands or Snapcaster Mages, cards for Standard. Because this format can still be played in paper, it's still enjoyable, and it's still fairly cheap to get into. Same thing with EDH staples. People are never going to stop buying those things as long as they remain, kind of cheap and affordable. Because they are just that, cheap, affordable, and it's just kind of like a long-lasting fun you can have. It's just not there and gone. How many times are you going to be able to use a piece of power that is banned in EDH? Like, that just goes and sits somewhere else. That's the kind of expenditure you're not going to be seeing by people who have a little bit of spare income in this time period. And this is just the beginnings of what we're seeing for the recession. The longer it goes, obviously, this is going to be more impactful, but the collectors keep collecting because their cash flow just doesn't stop.
Yeah. I mean, you'll still see the people like, Nocenti or stuff like that are known quantities at the upper echelons of what's going on, that they'll still collect, but they don't do enough in mass to move the market typically because it benefits them to do it slowly and over time.
Yes.
To have it move slowly rather than make one big move and all of a sudden, well, is this real? Is it not? Because they can't sell them because they crash the market.
Yeah.
It's all faith-based perceived values. So that stuff doesn't hit that same spike. Whereas, it was up on the Reddit today, Assassin's Trophy is suddenly nearly $20 on TCG. Well, it's still available on a couple of bigger vendors' websites for less than 15. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Oh, all right. This is also a point in time where you can start to make your own moves. This is the time of year, the winter sell-off, where players in my area know they can come to me with higher-end stuff, and this is where I buy a lot of what I invest in. I don't do a lot of standard and modern. I'll leave that for other vendors in the area. But my players who are either college students who just kind of come and go throughout the year, or people who are just exiting the format done and want their investment back, or people who bought into, as I just said, invest, know they can out to me at buy list or better. So, at this time of year where, prices are going to tank and they need that money.
Yeah.
So this is definitely an opportunity, if you have the extra money, to start making your moves on higher end cards, be it reserve list or not, that will make a return either Q2 2020 or maybe a little later in that year if the US does head into an economic recession.
Yeah. What can you, the layman, do with this? Well, like we said, this is your opportunity to start making some moves if there's stuff that you think is a good investment. If you see someone in your local buy-sell trade group throwing up, Plague Engineers or Fetch Lands or something, it's a decent time to get in on those because you're not going to have a problem trading them out over the next few months or year, however long it lasts.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas you may have some issues moving some more illiquid stuff. I mean, probably going to have a little bit of problem moving Time Twisters or Bazaars because it's just not there.
Yeah.
The way that it is for Fetch Lands.
Yeah, exactly. And I like the analogy you gave earlier before the stream crashed and on Twitter, where you can take 1,500 and put that towards duels or power, something that's a liquid right now if you're a backpack grinder or a small store, or you can put that towards something like chain veils.
Yeah.
And turn those chain veils either to buy a list later on in a couple months when they go up, or picking them up from people who are selling out now on Facebook Marketplace or like Kijiji, Craigslist, stuff like that.
Yeah.
To other local players or to buy less for profit. And this is another one of those times where there are a lot of avenues you can take. You can be smart with your money and definitely come out ahead. The winter time is great for both buyers and sellers. The fall to winter, sorry, the summer to fall transition is generally bad as a seller because you're competing with everybody else who's selling out of old standard and modern rotations, like quote unquote rotations, where we just end the modern season and move into standard, right? But now's not a bad time as somebody who's looking to buy. There's still plenty of sellers out there, but all the prices are just deflated as a whole.
Yeah, and it seems like, every day in sick deals, high end, whatever Raz groups you're in, whatever, someone's posting, hey, I need holiday money. Here's some stuff. And, there's times where if you scout it out, you can find it at buy list.
Yes.
And not like Card Kingdom buy list, which is, basically TCG low, but what a GP vendor would pay, which is like 60 to 70% of low. Because sometimes they just need the cash right away, and it's the time of year where that's going to happen, combined with, perceived economic downturn, and now everybody knows the sky is falling. Thanks.
I mean, and it's useful information just presented in a terrible format.
Sometimes.
Most times.
But yeah, and I mean, even talking to vendors, they've said the same thing. Like, this is where GP vendors, TOA, Moose, stuff like that, they're going to start shifting towards the more liquid stuff.
Yep.
Especially like with all the uncertainty going on right now with events, vendors are significantly more hesitant that base their business model on the GP circuit to figure out what to go after.
Oh, absolutely.
For those of you that haven't been following, basically, so these Command Fests got announced, and they're the weekend of Eternal Weekend, which is a problem in and of itself because that's always been like a sacrosanct time of year. The one in DC, is run by Star City Games. The one in Chicago is run by Pastimes. The one in Seattle is run by Channel Fireball. And the perception among most of the vendor industry is Channel's losing the contract for next year. And they're giving a trial run for other TOs to run GPs. Well, we don't have a GP schedule yet. We don't know what it's going to look like. And some people, and I think this is a little more extreme, aren't sure that GPs may be a thing next year in the vendors. And that's a very, fatalist, in my opinion, just absurd conclusion to come to.
Yeah.
But they're definitely going to be drastically different because right now, as a vendor, the more GPs you vend, the higher you are in the list to pick where your booth is, which may not seem like a lot to some people, but just basic marketing, that can have a huge impact on your weekend.
Oh, absolutely.
So if we go to a regional system, all of a sudden, well, if you're in the Midwest, it's a casual haven. So you can just focus on those if you're a business based out of the Midwest and just do those GPs and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You'll have all the cards you need. But if you're one of the vendors like, 95 or MTG Mint that goes to everything, there's a little bit of uncertainty there as far as where you want to put your money right now because you don't know what you're going to be doing next year.
No, it's definitely an interesting I think it more a thought experiment moving forward because if you don't know what's coming up as a player who's looking to sell, that means you're going to have to start conducting all your business online. And not everybody has the best of times online. It's also hard to haggle online to get that deal online. And from the vendor perspective, it also makes it hard to acquire cards outside of your buy list if you're no longer going out to Grand Prix.
Yeah.
Because those were just places where you could vacuum up infinite if your prices were good. You didn't have to worry about local events. You didn't have to worry about having an actual store. You could be a GP vendor without a physical storefront. You just needed a warehouse for processing. And it kind of it changes the secondary market paradigm and kind of challenges things as we know it. But it also cuts down on the physical play experience, which is floating, right, or circling the drain is better right now as we know it. And I don't know how much that affects things right now in regards to economic forecasting for Magic and where you could look to shift your money to invest, but in the end, it all still points to the same thing, which is just EDH is the way to go.
Yeah, long term you'll never have a problem with it, and I think that again this doesn't like address the core topic of the episode, which is the potential for a recession and what it means for Magic.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something that compounds it on the vendor level, where they don't necessarily know now, like, well, buy prices are even more in flux.
Yep.
Sell prices for them are even more in flux because there's an added element of uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's interesting to see because, companies like Card Kingdom, they don't rely on the GP model at all. Their buy list is unaffected by that. So
Correct.
their buy list is static. But if most of your outs, like me, happen to be other vendors because you're at so many GPs, this is actually a pretty, impactful thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and it kind of cuts out that binder grinder angle that people take on going to GPs. You can still floor trade at a GP. That's still possible. You just shouldn't be using prices for anything or gouging, whatever it is. Whatever the definition is that Channel Fireball has given out. That's a no-no, but grinding is still fine, and that does kind of put a spanner in the works for a number of people who are just trying to still do it physically.
Yeah.
You can still grind on Facebook. That's still an option. You're in and out. You can still work there, but it just slows everything down. With an economic recession looming and basically the expected drop in the general spending habits of the overall consumer in a luxury goods market, which would represent high-end Magic cards, it does raise the question of where do you expect people to be putting their money during this time period that aren't collectors. And we talked a little about standard and modern, and the picks that we made for the week are kind of linked to this topic because there are still cards that we're seeing move up both on the buy list and the resale side of things. So you can still kind of watch market trends and see all right, these still might be luxury items, but they haven't hit a threshold yet where they've just become something that's completely unobtainable. You still have Scrubland and Scrubland, Plateau, and Taiga floating at the low end for duels. There's a number of fast mana artifacts for EDH that have a fairly low floor right now that people can still buy into. There are still legacy strategies revolving around reserve list cards like Stifle Knot, where Knot just picked up a little bit because of the mirror that was released. They're finally playing it again. But this is another strategy you can buy into. That deck was actually mono blue. There are no dual lands in that deck. At this point, Phyrexian Dreadnought is the most expensive card, and if I price it out real quick, I'm going to go ahead and guess that deck's $300, $400, which is, or can be, the price of a standard deck at some point in time.
Yeah. And you can still keep an eye on new sets, obviously, because standard, the weekly grind stuff, like I said, that's still viable.
Yeah.
That's still going to happen. That market still exists. So going in on whatever hot tech is in standard, I don't know. I don't play that format. It's not great. And admittedly, a hole in my financial knowledge.
Yeah.
But
nobody's sure right now.
Niv Mizzet, I'm sure there's some jank build with him or Teferi or something. You can still go in on those, and the opportunity is there. But that stuff is, largely, I don't want to say economy proof, but it's certainly resistant to large economic factors like that.
Yeah, what you might see is a drop in, a hard drop in the, I don't know what they're calling them, the full art cards, extended arts.
Not masterpieces?
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah. Not Mythic
Collector's
Edition, Mythic
editions.
Edition, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yet another way to print a rare in standard. Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a decent definition of a luxury good when compared to the rest of the marketplace. You could buy the new fetch land for what did I price it out to? $12 or something like that last week, or you could buy the full art version of it for 20 times as much. It's ridiculously.
Why? It's dumb. Stop.
You gotta lend a price to the collector's edition boxes, I guess, but the math on it says the EV on it's terrible. The Stifle Knot deck, by the way, is $1,000. All of the money is tied up in the 4 Phyrexian Dreadnoughts that are $60 a piece and the 4 Force of Will that are $100 a piece.
Yeah.
If you cut the Force of Wills out and replace them with something else, 'cause it's already running days, so you got to find another free counterspell.
Force of negation.
Yeah, that drops the deck to $600, and that is a perfectly reasonable amount for a legacy deck. You know, that's less than 2 underground seas, or 2 Trops right now. Like,
almost 1 underground sea.
Yeah. So, and Dreadnought is a card that went from about $35 to $60 in a weekend because of this thing, and we won a Moto event, or top 8 at a Moto event.
So of course everyone's on it now.
Yes, it just represents that opportunity cost where you have a high-profile reserve list artifact that just kind of floats along for casual demand thanks to EDH, and then something happens, it pops, and it's still fairly obtainable.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like if a Zoo deck became popular in Legacy, became the #1 deck to play, or if we went back to like a red-green's lands build that's circled around Taiga required 4 of them. That card would almost 1.5x overnight because it's just on the low end of the scale. Scrubland and Plateau, like I said, are just the tag-alongs right now.
Yeah.
So,
but I think it's, you know, I thought, again, it was obviously worth covering in greater detail because I think it is, you know, there's a lot of misinformation about that stuff out there, and we decided, you know, again, when we set out to do this, we kind of wanted to be a layman's exercise in MTG Finance, and that's why we're here, man.
And absolutely, and it's good to know that when this is happening, there's still places where you can put your money to be relatively safe.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's not just everything is going to become stagnant and some things might come down. There will be no crash in reserve list cards ever until they literally reprint them. They're all, at this point, for the majority, collector's items.
Yeah.
You know, that's that. Some of them are a little less collectible than others. Like Dreadnought is a good example because it's from Mirage, and there's a lot of stuff around that era that people just don't care about. You know, some of that stuff is just reserve list because of the rules they put forth when creating it.
Yeah.
You know, so you gotta stay away from some of the clunkers that you can check out on the actual reserve list, but there's definitely safe havens.
Yeah. Which, you know, pay attention to the vendors.
Yep, absolutely.
What they're going after, those are your safe havens. So if you got bots, whatever you got to track that stuff, use that.
Yeah. This weekend it was actually kind of convenient with the lack of actual coverage at the GP because of the WotC contract where there's a non-compete against MPL coverage. Everybody that I track had the same photos of all the buy lists on a day-by-day basis. So it was pretty easy to see what was going on and who was kind of fighting against each other to pick up things like Black Lotus is now being floated at 12,000, up from 10. MTG Mint had been floating it at 10 for a very long time, I think close to a year. And I don't think it was Toa. Somebody else that is another perennial GP vendor had it for 12.
95 has had it for 12. Whatever the last GP I went to was, Indy? Yeah, at Indy they had it floated for 12 on their list.
Yeah, if their list was in descending price order, then up top was UC still. They didn't have a Lotus on there.
Oh, yeah.
So
maybe it wasn't them.
Well,
but
at Indy it might have been, but not at Atlanta.
Yeah.
So
but yeah, it's the type of thing that, you know, the information's out there. Just gotta pay attention to it.
And like I said, it just happened to be convenient. There's nowhere that I could look where I wouldn't find this information. It was very obvious. There are some interesting buy lists out there that are mainly focused on standard and modern, and that's actually a really good sign for people heading into the winter and the recession, because like we talked about, these vendors are saying, like, we are still interested in standard cards, we are still interested in modern cards, because these are moving. Not every vendor had Lotus, had Mox Diamond, had dual lands on their list. Those are vendors that generally have a captive audience and are willing to bring those in because they have a market. Some of them don't even have a large online presence to resell through. They actually just put them in cases at their stores.
Yeah.
Or their store, what have you. And it just moves there. But that's because they have a local player base that is looking for those cards. You know?
Yeah. And it's, you know, you'll see at this point, and this is something I always find interesting, when stuff like this happens, you'll see the two vendors that you may not, or one or two vendors that you may not think are like necessarily big players, but they'll all of a sudden like BDE some power buy price.
Yep.
Because you don't know it, but like, Shohei, for example, at MTG Deals, every now and then when he's at the booth, I mean, their buy prices are just absurd because he's getting them and taking them back to China. So when it's super cheap here, it's way more expensive there because those prices aren't affected by our recession as much.
Yeah.
A little bit, yes, especially China, but
yeah.
It's interesting to see.
That's actually a good point to make, though, is that heading into the recession, depending on how long it lasts into 2020, the number of Magic Fests we have, you might start seeing buy prices actually recover at the GP level because you'll have more people coming in from Europe and from Asia in particular buying at our prices because they can turn them around and sell them at what they used to be. And there's a large profit margin to be gained there. So you see a lot more players in that space. A lot more people come out. And because high-end cards like that are a global trend. You can follow them across the globe. Like, why was Ren and 6 being floated at 80 for the longest time? Because that was the market in Asia. So coming over here and buying them when the market dictated like 50 and 60, they were able to gather up everything they possibly could in the room. And vendors didn't want to pay those prices because they had a problem outing those cards at 100, which is basically what you have to do when somebody's buying at 80.
Yeah.
You can't just price lower because then you might as well just walk the card over there.
Yeah. But it'll be interesting to see how it shapes out.
Yep. And I'm going to move on to picks so we can finally link it all together.
Yep, let's do it.
Yep. So heading into the GP weekend coming out of Star City, I was looking at Legacy lists and I wanted to pick up something that I thought would pop because of what happened in the Star City event, and not because we saw a brand new trend in the sense that like Ren and 6 is now a definitive player in Team or Delver in some numbers, or that lands or depth-based decks are being played in a much higher percentage, thus the rise in Mox Diamond. What I went on was the Mystic Forge deck that Irelax top 64'd with. So that was played on Moto, and it's a lot easier to play there, much like KCI is, because the actions are kind of put forth in front of you and all your triggers are there to kind of see. It's hard to miss a lot of what's going on.
Yeah.
The deck needs to put legs under itself and go. So when I was looking through the list, I was like, all right, it's either Thran Dynamo or Grim Monolith. Some crossover card into EDH. And I was checking out Thran Dynamo, and the Commander reprint on that card is kind of depressed it to the point where they're about $7 each, down from like, almost 20 before the reprints. And I was like, it's got to be Grim Monolith. That's got to be the card, because that is an EDH card for people who just want to be super consistent. It is a necessity in any artifact-based EDH list. It is CDH playable. It has, generally speaking, been a cornerstone in Vintage in mono brown decks of any flavor, from Stacks to Mud to Turbo.
Yeah.
It shows up in Legacy in control decks, like Mud Control, in years past. And I just checked out the price, and it looked a little stagnant for a card that's a very high-profile reserve list. It's also part of Middle School. It's not a core player in that format of Middle School and Pre-Modern yet, but it has applications there.
Yeah.
So I went with Grim Monolith as my pick. And then on Friday, after I released it, and I looked at the price, and on Friday it was going for about $150, I believe. Mm-hmm. $153.96 was the market. At GP Atlanta, it was on hot lists.
Yep.
So right now, Grim Monolith is on hot list for, I believe, 110 cash prior to a trade bonus. Card Kingdom is buying them for 90 cash, 117 credit. So this is a card with a $30 delta, which is about 20%.
Pretty good.
Correct. Which should kind of tell you that this is a card that is on its way up again.
Yeah.
If this Mystic Forge deck takes off, or if people start buying in because it's been stagnant for a while, and EDH is a card that hits $200 pretty quickly. My initial thought behind Mox Diamond was it still has room to grow, but when it grows quick, and so it is out of range for a lot of people very quickly. And there's also going to be a point in time where there are going to be too many barriers of entry into a depths or a land-based deck behind Tabernacle that that Diamond is probably going to come to a halt a lot faster than Grim Monolith is.
Yep.
This is definitely a card that is easily accessible and is cheaper than most dual lands. So for EDH players, this is kind of like... It's not the equivalent of a dual land for a mono brown player, but it is definitely a combo engine for EDH. It is a card that is never not going to see play. It's a card that is just going to keep going up, and I think it will go up faster than we think it will through the rest of 2019 into 2020. Like I said, especially as people keep playing this Mystic Forge deck in Legacy, and I think it's a very safe place to be if you want to own a playset.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easily within the next year, I would think it hits Mox Diamond price. It's got all the playability plus more liquidity because of EDH. Mox Diamond is something you find almost exclusively in CEDH when you're trying to optimize your turn 2 Adnaz or something like that, whereas Grim Monolith, everyone plays that.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
I think Mox Diamond also has a little bit more of a pedigree behind it than Grim Monolith in older formats. Like, Mox Diamond was great, and Grim Monolith were both great when they were in Standard, but when we shifted to Extended, Grim Monolith wasn't really played that much. It was Mox Diamond that actually powered out a lot of the old green-black decks, or helped a Lurian combo, or a lot of other odds and ends decks just get going. It wasn't Monolith. So it's like every couple of years, people remember, like, oh, that card actually wins events.
Yeah.
And so they just, disappear. And Lands isn't going anywhere in Legacy at this point in time.
No.
I don't know how many cards they have to print before people realize it's not going away. Blood Moon's not stopping it. Alpine Moon's not stopping it. Damping Sphere's not stopping it. Like,
Infinite Wastelands isn't stopping it. It
No.
just doesn't matter.
Because it'll infinitely wasteland you back. Like,
they don't care.
No. But when I was thinking about cards to go on, this is going to bait you into yours. When I heard about the Mystic Forge deck and I was thinking about what I wanted to pick for the next week, I was like, this card has got to be in there. There's no way you play this deck without your pick in it. And then when I saw the list, I was like, this is insane.
Yeah.
Not having this pick in it is... I thought that was insane until I read through the rest of the deck. I was like, all right, I guess you got to go off on 4. You got to go off on 4. You can't be floating equipment through your deck.
So my pick then is Metalworker. So this is a card which I've been kind of eyeing traffic on it. So we had our highest price of all time on May 16th, 2018, and it's been on a steady downward trend since.
Yep.
Our current low is sitting at 39, average of 50, market of 47. So Metalworker also... There's a few people I know that play Mud and Legacy that are super stoked now because of the new creature in Throne. The trample protection from multicolored guy, and they're going back up to 4 Metalworkers to try to power this guy through.
We get the name of it because this guy, like, I've watched people play it in standard testing, and it is the truth. Stone Coil Serpent.
Yes, that one.
It's X art.
Yeah.
CMC X. And it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it.
And in Mud, this gives the deck a way to deal with Knight of the Reliquary, which was actually a problem for it. Mm-hmm. Additionally, the only removal that really hits it is swords, which the deck had a problem. Like, Mud already had issues with Decay and Trophy. This solves those as well.
Yes.
So this fixes a lot of problems that the deck already has. In addition, having Reach is huge.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not very difficult to get to, 30 mana in that deck with an active Metalworker and some other good stuff out there to block a Depths token.
Do you staff combo in Mud? I can't remember the list anymore.
I know some people do.
Okay.
A lot of people don't anymore. But even just being able to generate off of, Metalworker and your pick, Grim Monolith, enough mana to make this into close to a 2020 is perfectly reasonable. Because, the list that we're already trying to just make insanely big Walking Ballistas and Dome You to Death can use this card.
And before Ballista, it was like Spine of Isha and Blightsteel.
Yeah.
So the Lightning Greaves pulled like triple duty in that deck, protecting your Metal Worker, giving it haste, allowing you to do stupid things with Staff of Domination, and then when you were ready, just plop your Blightsteel into play, give it haste, and one-shot somebody.
Yeah. Additionally, Metalworker is a card that has a perception of being fairly non-liquid, so a lot of vendors aren't super high on it. Take that for what you were. I have not had a problem trading it out or, selling it, but again, in my area, EDH is huge. Every Mud EDH player wants this card.
Yeah.
It is of those like super floated foil reserveless cards from Destiny, Replenish, Rector, Monolith, Metalworker, like all those early era foils that are worth too much money. Next to Monolith, Metalworker's the second most liquid. So I just think this card is primed within the next year to follow a similar trajectory to what Grim Monolith is. But I think, it won't be Mox Diamond level, but I could very easily seeing it reach what, Monolith currently is.
Yeah.
And sitting at around 100 by the end of the year.
No, I like Metalworker, and it's definitely a little card that I need to pick up another one for my cube, but I'm glad I bought in when it was super low years and years and years ago, because this price right now is based almost entirely on EDH demand. It's not played in Vintage anymore, and aside from Mud, it's never really been a legacy card. There are shenanigans you can do with a Goblin Welder, of course, and that's kind of where you didn't really see it in Slaver decks to power out Slaver because you had Tolarian Academy to do it instead. But there's goofy things you can do like that. With Manifold Key, it makes it a little more ridiculous. And it's definitely an engine card. Or not an engine card. It supports the engine. Staff is your engine. Or Bosch or Junk Dive or something like that allows you to just churn through, and this guy gives you the mana to actually get going. You don't need Paradox Engine necessarily. You just need a way to untap him. And that's it. And it, all in all, I think if you wanted to get in and see more returns for less investment, I think Metalworker is the way to go. I think Grim Monolith just has a higher floor and
a higher ceiling.
Yeah, and just a larger amount of playability in the long run. So to me, because of where I am, my player base, I would be able to move Grim Monolith better than I am to move a Metalworker. Because Monolith is just a colorless rock. Yeah. It's not like... You don't have to dedicate to the artifact theme.
No.
Like I got a guy up here that bought a Eureka a couple years ago because he's that kind of player. He's not buying a Metalworker, but he bought a Grim Monolith for that deck along with a Survival. Like,
of course, yeah.
To each their own, and this is you got to recognize what you can do with your player base. So, I like Metalworker, and like I said, it's a card I know I need to move on faster for my cube to replace the one that's in there. But it's a nice pick and something you need to keep your eye on because it floats by without a lot of press.
Yep. And
all of a sudden, the day you realize you need it, you should have bought it a couple months ago because it's just gone through the roof, and you don't know why.
That's the day you realize
it. Yeah. And I think both these cards are really good examples of that.
Yeah.
If you're not the kind of person that's super spiky in EDH, these cards are just gonna kind of float by, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, where'd they go? And well, here you have it.
Guess I need them now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And because the Urza sets still have a little bit of mystique about them for the early foiling, being how powerful they are, etc. This is actually a little more of a collector's set than Mirages.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of these cards on the reserve list are going to hold value because of the collectability of them, because what they did to the game, what they mean to the game, and how an actual played game has to be warped around them.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about Phyrexian Dreadnought or LED. Those things just kind of come and go. Alluring is a little more impactful than the other two.
Yeah.
But the rest of Tempest is not the same thing as the rest of Destiny or the rest of Saga when it comes to reserve list cards. So, something to think about.
For sure.
But with that, guys, I think that's it for the week. Right?
That's all we got. We are on, do we say Friday, the 27th?
For the pick?
Yeah. For the drawing.
We can go the 27th. That'll be fine. We can give people a couple more days to jump in. I'll pick it while I'm vending at my pre-release. I can do that.
Hey, there we go.
Yeah.
So we'll have the drawing for the C19 set for our patrons. They will get the entire box shipped to them. Feel feel free to sign up on our Patreon, where you can find us at MTG Cabalcast.
Yep. Well, you can find us there on Twitter as well, at MTG Cabalcast. On Twitter, I am at Halt I Am Reptar. You are...
I am at Thirsty Sizzler.
And we will see you next week.
See ya.